think most people are familiar with the whole concept of a traditional arms race whereby nations compete with each other for ever fancier and more dangerous armaments. This is back to the Cold War in the 50s and 60s. This is Kennedy and Khrushchev, isn't it? Yeah. And then another arms race, a biological or Darwinian arms race, in which the bull elk, two in this case, two males and I think two females, are competing, right? And the positional good in this case is the horns. Right? So the horns actually affect their ability to move through dense underbrush, but nevertheless, there is this strong biological imperative to have the largest horns. Right? So this is the definition of an arms race from Collins Dictionary. So continuing competitive attempt by two or more nations to have available to it more and more powerful weapons than the other. Right? And I paraphrase this in the educational context to say that this is the continuing competitive attempt by two or more people in society to have more and more educational qualifications than the other. So it's that relativity that we're emphasizing here that creates this competitive educational arms race. So this is a model. It's a very simple framework of thinking about how, in a theoretical context, how you might start to see an educational arms race emerge. So I set up the model by saying, very hypothetical, very stylized model whereby you have universities, tertiary education grouped into two: an elite group of universities, where there are 10 places only, and non-elite universities where there are 90 places. And there are, in this initial setup, only 100 students, right? And there's perfect information about the student quality, right? So we know the 10 students that are qualified to attend the elite institutions, and the rest will go to the non-elite universities. Also created some differences in the returns that the various elite students and non-elite students enjoy, and also the costs that it takes for you to sort of partake in that investment in education, either at the elite stage, at the elite level, or at the non-elite level. So, as I say here, it costs 10 units to prepare. You can equate this to dollars, right? So it takes $10 to pay for all the family investments, the tuition classes, the cram classes, everything, all the social costs as well, to qualify to get into the elite university. Okay, and they will earn each year after graduation $10 as well, the elite students. In the case of the non-elite students, it costs you $1, but you will also earn $1 each year. Right? So that's the setup. The results of this, in this very stylized, very perfect information world, payback for elite students is a year, obviously, from their cost of education. And the payback period also for the non-elite students is also a year, right? And so everything is in equilibrium here, but again, very highly stylized and dependent on perfect information on about the students' qualities and capabilities. So, revising the model a little bit, we now introduce the whole idea of imperfect information about student abilities. Right? So we don't know who qualifies at the end of the day to become an elite student. Right? So there's some element of competition because we don't know. It still costs the same for all the costs and the returns from education. But now people aren't sure about whether I qualify to be an elite student or not. Right? So in this scenario, I'm assuming that instead of 10 students competing for only 10 places, we have 20 students out of the 100 that compete for the elite schools spots. So they pay the costs. They all pay the costs, $10. Only 10 will get in. And in this scenario, because we now have 20 students that are competing in this situation for only 10 elite school spots, the cost will rise for society at large, and only the 10 successful elite students will enjoy the higher returns. The losers in this arms race obviously have paid the cost, but only enjoy earnings of $1 each year after graduation, and they'll have a 10-year payback if they participated in that race, in that competition to get into the elite school, but only end up with sort of the non-elite earnings. Okay. So societally, the cohort payback period for the 100 students is 1.47 years. And this is a slide that just shows you, if more and more, a larger and larger proportion of students compete for those 10 elite school spots, right? And you can see the escalation in the cohort expenses and the payback period correspondingly. The losers' costs in this scenario escalate quite quickly. Well, if we get a competitive arms race going, the costs will rise, right? If I spend that $1 more on tuition, that one thing more, cram a little bit more just to get through that education, sorry, that exam that qualifies me to get into the elite institution, I'll be a winner. I'll be in the elite education and therefore earn that higher income. If I don't, the costs of losing are immense, right? So the losers bear all of those costs. So there's a tendency for these costs to escalate and inflate very quickly. So again, this will show that scenario. This is a bit of a complicated chart, but it's kind of the thing that I'm doing at the moment on national transfer accounts. The solid lines are consumption at different ages. Right? So as you can see here, this is age 0 to 20. The amounts of spending on education, particularly, have increased in Japan. 1984, the blue line. In 2009, the red line. The dotted lines are income, but you'll see that the increase in educational expenses have gone up over that 25-year period by quite a lot. Right, so we've touched on Japan, we've touched on South Korea, both countries similar to Singapore with ultra-low fertility rates. This chart shows you human capital expenditure in terms of a percentage of annual income during your peak working ages between 30 and 49. Right, so Koreans are spending about 600 and roughly 40% of 6.4 times, 6.4 years of peak earnings, right, on human capital expenditure on children, between the ages 0 to 24, right? And their fertility rate, which is the x-axis, low, 1.3 or 1.4. Singapore will be around about here. Higher educational expenses, higher spending on young, primarily on education, but fertility rates plummet. This shows you the consumer price index and the movement between 1990 and 2015, so a 15-year period. And over that time, you'll see that education, so fees for primary school, fees for secondary schools and other and junior colleges, tuition fees for tertiary education, rose during that period by over 4% each year. Okay, the average in the consumer price index basket was around about 1.8% over that period. So educational expenses in Singapore for primary school, again, highly subsidized, but still increased at a rate of 4-something% over that period each year. Higher, much higher than the consumer price index. And then this chart is essentially showing you something a little bit complicated, but what I wanted to show here is almost the regressive effects of public expenditure on education. So we spend a lot per capita on, actually the most per capita on tertiary education, because universities are really expensive places to run, and fewer people go into university, right? So the per capita spending on universities per student is quite high, and that, at the primary school level is obviously lower, right? So I'm comparing some different countries, so Finland, Germany, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. And Singapore is the highest in that ratio, in that we spend more per capita on tertiary education for each student than primary students. if you run the race, right, we're all starting off in primary school. The longer you stay and the longer you keep winning and moving on to the next level, more and more public expenditure is spent on you. So that there is this slightly regressive aspect to this phenomenon. Right? The educational arms race, again, winner take all. If we have these effects taking place, then the winner at the end of the day has received more in terms of public subsidies on education than those that have dropped out at earlier stages. Right? And if you're not as well equipped to participate in that race, then you have less spent on you, which is, it's not the worst aspect of regression in the fiscal space in Singapore, but here is a small example of this possibly. I have put here two studies. There have been more since that focus on this issue of the relationship between education and social mobility. These two studies compare something similar and look at the educational attainment of the fathers, I think it is, or the parents anyway, and compare that with the educational attainment of their children. And if the idea is if there is a bit more equality in terms of social mobility, right, then your parents' educational qualification should matter to your educational trajectory. Right? Your parents' human capital and economic capital shouldn't provide you that much more advantage to bring up, to favor their kids over the kids of less well-advantaged families. Right? So that was essentially what Yip from the Ministry of Finance, Yip Chun Sing found from the Ministry of Finance, that in Singapore at least, there was a relatively high degree of intergenerational mobility. Right? So the parents' educational attainment didn't really significantly affect the educational attainment potential of those cohorts born between 1969 and 1978. Okay, that's one paper, admittedly with a lot more data than the second paper by Ng et al. In 2009 that compared, looked at the intergenerational mobility, earnings mobility in Singapore as well as in the United States, and that found that there was a slightly higher, in fact, higher coefficient of income mobility. So the correlation between parent and child earnings and educational attainment was a lot higher. And so a little bit of contradictory evidence here. So I'll end it with this. And every year at National Day, we pledge to build a democratic society based on equality and justice. Right? Our children say the pledge in school, right? And they say these words. Right? I love this picture. So equality doesn't mean justice. And again, I refer to this setup in my paper. Right? So this is a sports stadium, right? In the paper, what I refer to is spectators in the stadium, right? The front row stand up, right, to get a better view. Then the second row, the third row, with their view obstructed, they too stand up until everybody in that area is standing up, right? Everybody's relative view is still the same as when it started, but everybody's now standing up, and presumably, their legs are getting tired and all that sort of stuff, right? So I think we just need to kind of just get a mechanism whereby we just all sit down and agree to sit down. Okay. This is a slightly different take on this, in that the artist is trying to show, this is equality, right? So each child has the same box, and they can all see. The shortest one can't see. Right? So that's the result. Everybody has been given the same resources, but the advantage, the tallest one can see, the middle one can see, unfortunately the shortest one cannot. Right? If we redistribute the boxes, then obviously the shortest boy can see. So that is more fair, right? That's cool. Right? But I would also propose another remedy. Right? And that remedy is to remove the fence altogether. Right? And that is probably societally the best thing that we can do. Right? In my example of the stadium and the spectators, it's that collective agreement to all sit down.